Hi, I'm JT from Collarts. Today we're going to have a look at an analog mixing console and how it all works. So, looking at the desk, we have 16 channels going across sideways, and then we have a whole bunch of features or sections, should we say, going down from top to bottom. Now, like the signal itself, we'll go from top to bottom. So we start here in this first section where we get the input. So the input section here controls the gain of the microphone coming into the mixing console. We then have a high pass filter button. Second section is an equalizer where you have your high, your mid and your low frequencies. Then we have auxiliaries, which are going to be used for fallbacks and effects. We have a pan button. Pan stands for panorama, so that means we can go to the left and to the right. And then we have a fader section here where you can turn up the main volume going to front of house. That's it in a nutshell. You basically know how the whole mixing console works now. Awesome. Let's get into a little bit more detail. So, this input section is very, very important. If we get this bit right, then everything else feeds perfectly into the other sections of the desk. This gain here, quite simply, if we press a button down the bottom here called solo or PFL, that will bring up our signal on these meters over here on the side. So now, when I talk into the microphone, you see we get a good strong signal. So we turn the mic up until we get a nice strong signal, perfect, and we can move on. So, first little button that we get to press here. Now, this one has just basically a little arrow and 100 Hertz written on it, and that means it's going to take out all the frequencies below 100 Hertz. Now that is to stop the P and the B on the microphone from making noises. So if I take that out, you'll hear P and P on the microphone, which we call plosives, and they don't sound very nice, so we want to get rid of those. Now, all of these high pass buttons, we usually have them pressed the entire time, and you don't press them for channels like a kick drum or a bass guitar or anything with really low frequencies. You might find keyboards or backing tracks from an iPod, all of that sort of stuff. You would not press the high pass filter, but for the rest, might as well leave it in. Second section, this is the EQ section. These black knobs here are going to basically adjust the high frequencies. If we turn it to the right, we get more high frequencies. We turn it to the left, we get less high frequencies. Similar thing happens here with the mids and the low frequencies, except for the fact that in the middle here we have what we call a sweepable mid section. This means that that white pot that we have here, we can adjust what frequency it is we're adjusting. So if I turn that down here to where we get to about, let's say about 200 Hertz, I can add in 200 Hertz, or I can take out 200 Hertz. If I don't want to use 200 Hertz, I might turn that up to here where we get 3.5 kilohertz. So that's taking out 3.5 kilohertz, and that's putting in 3.5 kilohertz. Sweepable mids you'll find on a lot of mixing consoles. The bigger the mixing console, you might have sweepable high mids, sweepable low mids, even sweepable lows and sweepable highs. Now, this is all part of what we call a parametric equalizer. A parametric equalizer can often have one other button which isn't on this console, which is called a Q, and that adjusts the bandwidth, the width of the frequencies that we're either boosting or cutting. That's your EQ section. Let's move on to the next bit. Auxiliaries. Auxiliaries are for sending an extra copy of the signal that's in this channel out of the mixing console for something else. So usually for these first two here, which we have temporarily labeled FB for fallback and DF there for drum fill. So these are basically going to the fallback monitors on stage. So when someone's on stage and they're talking to their microphone and they have their own little speakers, you turn up this and that will turn up those speakers for them on stage. So that would give some to the drummer and that would give some usually to the people up the front of stage. Now, second two knobs we have down here, these are for effects. Now it's not always the same on every mixing console. You might have 4 lots of fallback and no effects. You might have 1 lot of fallback and 3 lots of effects. These are interchangeable. But for now, this third section of knobs here is we use at Collarts for an external effects unit. But the fourth knob here is the internal effects. So that controls some effects that are part of the mixing console. Up here, the purple knobs all relate to each other. So we end up with this, okay, purple, internal effects in this mixing console. If I get back here, you'll hear that when I turn this knob up, you'll be starting to get some effects, some reverb most likely. Lots of reverb, no reverb. And that's how that works. A little bit more on that stuff later when we head over to this side of the desk, the master section. But that at least gets us sorted that we have fallbacks and effects most of the time. Panorama, we spoke of this earlier. Bit to the left, bit to the right. In a live situation, you would most likely leave this in the center a lot of the time. But for some stereo items like a backing track or overheads on drums or a keyboard coming in that use 2 channels, you could pan one to the left and one to the right, and then you've got yourself a stereo channel there. Moving down, we get to our fader, which is going to send signal out to front of house, of course, sure. But we have a whole bunch of buttons here that make a really big difference to how things work for your mixing console. So the first one here, big red button, like the input. Red usually means scary or important on these mixing consoles. So having that mute button there is basically going to switch off that whole channel. Nothing will come out of front of house, nothing will come out of fallbacks, and nothing will go to the effects either. So you have to have that button off for anything to work. Now, the next button we have there is called sub. Sub will send parts of this channel over to a sub mix. We'll cover that one a bit later. We don't use it very much. This next button here is very important. Now, it's called mix, and basically means that we're sending this channel to the mix. So the mix is our masters and our front of house, which we cover over here a bit later, but I would call it almost like an on button. For right now, listening through this microphone, you can't hear me now, can you? Anyway, that is the on button so that you can get the sound going to front of house. You need that down. Now, it should be noted that if I turn that off, the sound will still go to the fallbacks. But as soon as I press mute, nothing will go to the fallbacks. So those 2 buttons can work in conjunction with each other to get your desired situation set up. Last button we have here is called solo on this mixing console. Now solo is basically the same thing as PFL. PFL stands for pre-fader listen, which means that what you can do is press that button and the sound will come out of the headphones on the mixing console. And the idea there is that you can basically press that button and listen on your headphones to what's happening on that channel before you send it out to front of house and blow people's heads off. This also brings it up on the meters, as we demonstrated earlier. So with that button down, if I talk right into the microphone, I can see how much signal I can get. Now, we set the input gain, we never want it to hit the red. Hitting the red in audio is danger, is bad. It's not good. It's going to peak and it's going to actually sound quite horrible and not work well. That's the solo and the PFL. So with almost every element of this entire channel covered, that is the entire mixing console up to here. So all of these knobs are exactly the same for each channel. Makes it all look pretty easy, doesn't it?